I sat in the private dining room listening to my family grade my life like a cold dish. They mocked my little computer hobby while bragging about a legendary CEO they worshipped like a god. There was just one problem. That CEO is me. Tonight I would watch them step into total humiliation, completely unaware that they were insulting the very person they were desperate to impress. My name is Peyton Reyes, and as I pushed open the heavy oak doors of Maison Laurent, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that always accompanied family obligations. The air inside the restaurant was conditioned to a crisp chill, a sharp contrast to the humid Charleston evening I had just stepped out of. This was a place where old money came to whisper and new money came to shout. My family, unfortunately, fell into the latter category, though they would die before admitting it. They were staging this dinner in a private room to celebrate my brother Grant getting engaged, but we all knew the real purpose. This was a merger, a consolidation of assets masquerading as romance, and I was the requisite prop, the black sheep invited solely to make the golden child shine a little brighter by comparison. I navigated the plush carpet toward the private dining area at the back. The maitre d' did not need to ask for my name. He simply pointed with a gloved hand, likely sensing that I did not belong to the confident. Loud laughter drifting from the main dining hall. I was wearing a charcoal blazer I had bought from a consignment shop 3 years ago. It was tailored perfectly and made of high-quality wool, but to my mother, it would scream failure simply because it did not carry a logo she recognized from a glossy magazine. I checked my watch. I was exactly on time. 7 o'clock on the dot. In my world, punctuality was a currency. In their world, making an entrance was the only thing that mattered. When I entered the private room, the performance had already begun. The walls were lined with silk wallpaper, and a crystal chandelier hung low over the table, casting a warm, flattering light on the people who least deserved it. My father, Richard Monroe, sat at the head of the table. He was holding a glass of Pinot Noir by the stem, swirling it with a practiced wrist motion that he thought looked aristocratic but actually looked pretentious. Richard owned a boutique financial consulting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. To hear him speak, you would think he moved markets with a whisper. In reality, he managed the retirement portfolios of dentists and local car dealership owners who wanted to feel important. "Ah, Peyton, you made it," Richard said without standing up. His smile was a flat line, tight at the corners. "We were worried you might have gotten lost. I hear the GPS on those older phones can be unreliable." I took the seat closest to the door. "Hello, Dad?" "My phone works fine." Grant was sitting to his right. My brother looked like a carbon copy of our father, just with better skin and a more expensive haircut. He was 34 years old and had never faced a consequence in his life that a check could not make disappear. He was wearing a navy suit that likely cost more than my first car, and on his wrist sat a platinum chronograph that he was making a great show of checking. Even though there was a clock on the wall, glad you could drag yourself away from the screen. "Peyton," Grant said, flashing a grin that did not reach his eyes. He turned to the woman sitting beside him, placing a possessive hand on her forearm. "Camille, this is the little sister I told you about. Peyton." I looked at Camille Rourke. She was the reason for this entire production. I knew her bio better than Grant did, though I would never tell him that. Camille was a partner at Redwood Crest Capital. She was serious people. She did not look like the trophy wives Grant usually paraded around the country club. She wore a black dress with zero embellishments, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently scanning me like I was a line of code that needed debugging. "Pleasure to meet you." "Peyton," Camille said. Her voice was low and steady. "Grant says you live here in Charleston now." I nodded, reaching for my water glass. "I do. I enjoy the history." My mother, Evelyn, chimed in from across the table. She reached out and patted my hand, her fingers cold and dry. Her touch was always meant to comfort the audience, not the recipient. "Oh, Peyton is just taking some time to figure things out. Camille, she has always been a bit of a wanderer, never quite settled. We worry about her, of course, but we support her little journey." I kept my face impassive. This was part of the script. I was the cautionary tale. I was the control group in the experiment of their success. I am not wandering. Mom, I said, keeping my voice level, I am working. Richard let out a short, sharp laugh, like a bark. Working, right. How is that going? By the way, still playing around with computers. It is a data logistics platform, I corrected him, though I knew it was useless. Grant rolled his eyes, picking up a piece of bread and tearing it aggressively. She is building a website or something. I tried to tell her she should look into real estate. That is where the equity is. But Peyton likes her puzzles. It is not a website. I said, feeling a familiar heat rise in my neck. It is a supply chain optimization tool. Camille tilted her head slightly. Supply chain. That is a crowded sector. Who is your target demographic? Before I could answer, before I could even open my mouth to speak the language that Camille and I actually shared, the language of scale, efficiency, and enterprise valuation, my father cut the air with his hand. Let us not bore Camille with the small stuff. Peyton, Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension. It is a hobby. Camille, an app. You know how millennials are. Everybody wants to be the next tech billionaire. He winked at Camille, as if they were sharing a joke at the expense of the help. Peyton just likes tinkering. It keeps her busy. I looked at Camille. For a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Confusion, curiosity. She did not smile back at Richard. She just looked at me, her gaze lingering on my face for a second too long. So, Grant said, raising his voice to reclaim the center stage. I was telling Camille about the Henderson deal. Closed it yesterday. $2 million in liquidity. The partners are talking about putting my name on the door by next year. That is wonderful. Darling, Evelyn cooed, beaming at him. You work so hard. You deserve it. Grant preened, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked at me, his eyes glinting with malice. He needed to twist the knife. Success was not enough for Grant. He needed to see someone else bleed to feel truly accomplished. Actually, Peyton, I was thinking about you the other day. Grant said, Were you? I asked. Yeah. I was talking to our operations director. We are looking for someone to handle the front desk and do some basic data entry. You know, scheduling, filing, keeping the break room stocked. The table went silent. The insult was so heavy it practically cracked the porcelain plates. He was offering me a receptionist job. Grant continued, feigning sincerity. I know things are tight for you, and frankly, it is a little embarrassing for the family that you are bouncing around doing freelance computer repair or whatever this is. If you want, I can pull some strings, get you an interview. It is steady money, benefits. It might be good for you to be in a professional environment for once. See how the real world works. Evelyn nodded enthusiastically. Oh, Grant, that is so generous of you. Peyton, you should listen to your brother. It would be such a relief to know you have a real job. And you could move back to Charlotte. We could keep an eye on you. I sat there, frozen. The waiters were moving around us, pouring wine, invisible and silent. I felt like one of them. My own family looked at me and saw nothing but a project that had failed. They saw a woman who bought clothes secondhand and lived in a small apartment. They had no idea that the hobby they were mocking had just closed a contract with a shipping conglomerate worth $40 million over 5 years. They did not know that Peyton Reyes was a ghost, but PR was a legend in the very circles Grant desperately tried to infiltrate. I looked at Grant. He was smirking, waiting for me to snap or to beg. He wanted gratitude for his insult. I looked at my father. He was busy inspecting the wine label, completely unbothered by the fact that his son had just publicly gelded his daughter's dignity. Then I looked at Camille. She was not eating. She was not smiling. She was looking from Grant to me, and back to Grant. Her expression was unreadable, but she had stopped drinking her wine. She placed the glass down on the white tablecloth with a deliberate, soft thud. No thank you, Grant, I said finally. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Calm, too calm. I am busy with my own work right now. Richard scoffed. Busy, doing what coding in your pajamas. He shook his head. You are stubborn. Peyton, that is your problem. You would rather starve than admit you need help. I am not starving, I said. Grant laughed. Not yet, but give it time. The rest of the dinner was a blur of self-congratulatory speeches. Grant talked about his golf handicap. Richard talked about a new boat he was considering buying, asking Camille if she liked sailing. Evelyn talked about the wedding plans, aggressively ignoring the fact that Camille looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. I barely touched my food. The coq au vin tasted like ash. I was analyzing them, recording this data, archiving every slight and every sneer. When the bill arrived, it came in a black leather folder. Richard snatched it up before the waiter could even place it on the table. He made a show of opening it, glancing at the total, which I estimated was likely over $800, and chuckling as if it were a penny. He pulled out a heavy black credit card, the kind made of metal that makes a distinct sound when it hits the tray. He held it up, catching the light, ensuring everyone saw it. On me, Richard announced. He looked at me then. His eyes were cold, devoid of any fatherly warmth. He looked at me like a bad investment he had finally written off. You save your money. Peyton, he said, loud enough for the staff to hear. Put it toward your rent. I do not want you calling me next week asking for a loan because your app did not sell. Grant snickered. Yeah, save it for the electric bill. I looked at the black card in his hand. It was a Centurion card. Invitation only. He was so proud of it. I had 3 of them in my safe at home, issued to different holding companies I controlled. I could have bought this restaurant, fired the staff, and turned the building into a server farm before dessert was served. But they did not know that. They saw a charity case. I pressed my lips together, fighting back the urge to pull out my phone and show them my bank balance. No, that would be too easy. That would be messy. They did not deserve the mercy of a quick revelation. They needed to learn the hard way. Thank you for dinner. Richard, I said. I did not call him Dad. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. Leaving so soon? Grant asked. We were going to order cognac. I have work to do. I said. Richard waved a dismissive hand. Back to the hobby. Go on then. Don't stay up too late playing games. I grabbed my purse. As I turned to leave, I caught Camille's eye one last time. She was watching me leave with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. She knew, or she suspected. She realized that the math of this family did not add up. I walked out of the private room, down the hallway, and into the humid Charleston night. The valet asked for my ticket. I handed it to him. My car was a 5-year-old sedan with a dent in the rear bumper. Perfect camouflage. As I waited for the car, I replayed the dinner in my head. Hobby, admin job, save your rent money. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of jasmine and exhaust fumes. For years, I had kept my success hidden to protect myself from their greed. I had stayed silent to keep the peace, but peace was no longer on the table. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to make me feel small to make themselves feel big. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had 6 missed messages from my chief technical officer regarding the acquisition rumors. I did not open them. Instead, I opened my calendar. Grant wanted me to see how the real world works. Fine. I typed a quick note to my assistant, scheduling a priority meeting for the morning. If my family wanted to play games with high stakes, they were about to discover that they had been sitting at the table with the dealer the entire time. Tonight was the last time Peyton Reyes would sit with her head down. Tomorrow, the CEO takes over, and she is not forgiving. Driving away from Maison Laurent, the silence in my car felt heavy, but it was a familiar weight. It was the same silence that had filled the hallways of my childhood home, a sprawling colonial revival in Charlotte that always felt more like a showroom than a place where people actually lived. Growing up in the Monroe household meant understanding a very specific set of laws. The first law was that human value was not intrinsic. It was not something you were born with, like blue eyes or predisposition for allergies. Value was calculated. It was a sum total of your client list, your country club membership tier, and the number of compliments our parents could extract from strangers based on your achievements. If our family was a corporation, Grant was the flagship product. He was engineered for the market. From the time he was 6 years old, he was dressed in miniature blazers and taught how to shake hands with a firm grip. He was the heir apparent, the golden asset that promised high returns. I, on the other hand, was a glitch. I was a system error that they could not quite debug. I was the child who preferred reading manuals to making small talk, the girl who stood at the edge of the family portraits, slightly out of focus, as if the camera lens itself knew I did not quite belong in the frame. This feeling of being an outsider in my own bloodline was not a sudden development. It was a slow accumulation of small cuts, tiny incisions that bled quietly over decades until the scar tissue became my skin. I remember a specific evening 2 years ago that perfectly encapsulated my standing in the Monroe Ledger. It was late August. The humidity in North Carolina was thick enough to chew on. I was sitting on the floor of my unfurnished apartment, surrounded by server racks and tangled cables, working on the beta version of what would eventually become the Kestrel Grid Core algorithm. I had not slept in 20 hours. My eyes were burning, but my mind was electric with the thrill of creation. I took a break to scroll through social media, a rare moment of mindless consumption. That was when I saw the photo. It was posted by a local society page. The caption read, "The Monroe family brings elegance to the Lake Norman Charity Gala." I stared at the screen. The photo showed my parents and Grant standing on a yacht deck, holding flutes of champagne. My father was wearing a tuxedo. My mother was in a shimmering silver gown that I knew cost $4,000 because she had complained about the fitting schedule for weeks. Grant looked dashing in a white dinner jacket, laughing at something the photographer had said. They looked perfect. They looked complete. There was just one problem. I had no idea this event was happening. I sat there in my sweatpants, feeling a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was not a small dinner. This was the biggest philanthropic event of the season. Hundreds of people were there, neighbors, family friends, people I had known since kindergarten, and I had not even received a text message. I called my mother. I did not want to. But the hurt was a physical thing, sharp and demanding. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless and mingling with the sound of a live jazz band in the background. "Hello, Mom. It is Peyton," I said. I saw the pictures, the gala at Lake Norman. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the clink of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation. "Oh, yes," she said, her tone shifting from distracted to that patronizing sweetness she reserved for difficult situations. "It is lovely. Peyton, the weather held up beautifully." "Why am I not there?" I asked. The question sounded pathetic even to my own ears. Evelyn sighed, a soft puff of air that signaled I was being unreasonable. "Honey, we talked about this with your father. You know how these events are. Tickets were $500 a plate. I have $500. Mom," I said, though at the time, that amount would have severely impacted my grocery budget for the month. "It is not about the money." "Peyton," she said, lowering her voice, "it is just, look around here. Everyone is very established. It is all partners, directors, vice presidents, people talking about mergers and summer homes in the Hamptons. We just thought you would feel out of place." The phrase hit me like a physical slap. Out of place. "We did not want you to feel awkward," she continued, twisting the knife while pretending to bandage the wound. "You know how you get when people ask what you are doing with your life. We wanted to spare you that discomfort. We were protecting you, protecting me." That was their favorite lie. They were not protecting me from the world. They were protecting their brand from me. I was the unfinished product, the unpolished prototype that lowered the average stock price of the family image. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of my servers. That night, I wrote 3,000 lines of code. I poured every ounce of that rejection into the logic of my system. If they thought I was a machine that did not fit in, I would build a machine that ruled the world they were so desperate to impress. But the memories did not stop there. The Lake Norman incident was private pain, but the 4th of July barbecue the previous summer had been a public execution. It was held at the country club, a sprawling green lawn dotted with white tents and smelling of roasted pork and expensive perfume. I had attended because it was mandatory. My father had insisted. "It looks bad if the whole clan is not there," he had said. "People talk." So I went. I wore a simple sundress and stood by the hydration station, hoping to blend in with the landscape. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, the same man whose deal Grant had bragged about tonight, approached us. He was holding a beer and looking jovial. "Richard," he boomed, clapping my father on the back. "Great turnout. And this must be the kids. Grant, I hear you are killing it at the firm." I saw the quarterly report. Impressive numbers. Grant beamed, puffing out his chest. "Thank you, sir. We are just trying to maximize value for our clients." Mr. Henderson nodded approvingly, then turned his gaze to me. "And Peyton. Right, I have not seen you in ages. What are you up to these days? Still in school?" I opened my mouth to answer. I was going to say that I was consulting for a logistics firm. It was the truth, albeit a simplified one, but my father stepped in before I could make a sound. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his fingers digging into my collarbone. It looked like a gesture of affection, but it felt like a restraint. "Peyton is taking a little sabbatical from the rat race," Richard said, flashing a charming smile at Mr. Henderson. He raised his free hand and made air quotes with his fingers. "She is currently finding herself." Grant snickered into his drink. "Yeah, she is on a spiritual journey to locate a paycheck." Mr. Henderson laughed, a deep, belly-shaking laugh. "Oh, to be young and aimless again. Must be nice. Well, do not worry. Peyton, you will figure out what you want to be when you grow up eventually." I was 30 years old. I stood there, frozen under the weight of my father's hand and the neighbor's pity. My face burned. I looked around the circle of adults, my father, the neighbor, my brother, and realized I was not a person to them. I was a punchline. I was the comic relief used to break the tension of their serious lives. That was the day I learned my most valuable lesson: silence is survival. I stopped trying to correct them. I stopped trying to explain that finding myself actually meant building a proprietary neural network for predictive shipping analytics. I stopped trying to defend my choices. Every time I spoke, I gave them surface area to attack. If I said I was working on software, they called it playing video games. If I said I was independent, they called it unstable. So I retreated. I adopted a strategy of total opacity. I let them think whatever they wanted. I let them paint their own picture of a struggling, lost daughter because it made them feel superior. And when they felt superior, they left me alone. I moved out of the nice condo my father had offered to subsidize and rented a studio apartment in a quiet part of town. I sold the car they approved of and bought the sedan. I stopped buying designer clothes and started dressing in neutrals. I cut out the galas, the fundraisers, the networking mixers. To them, this retreat looked like failure. They whispered that I was depressed, that I had given up. My mother would call and ask if I was eating enough. Her voice laced with the hope that I was miserable so she could swoop in and save me. But it was not failure. It was incubation. I stripped my life down to the essentials so I could focus entirely on Kestrel Grid. I removed the noise of their expectations so I could hear the signal of my own ambition. While they were busy polishing their social standing, I was building an empire in the dark. Now, tonight, driving away from that restaurant. The realization hit me with the force of a collision. The dinner at Maison Laurent was not just a meal. It was not even really about Grant's engagement. It was a reenactment of the 4th of July. It was a sequel to the Lake Norman Gala. My father had invited me for one reason: to provide contrast. Camille Rourke was a woman of substance. She was powerful, wealthy, and sharp. For Grant to look like her equal, he needed to look better than someone else. He needed a baseline to measure his success against. I was the baseline. They had brought me there to dangle me in front of Camille like a cautionary tale. Look at our son, the star, and look at the daughter, the failure. See how far he has risen. See how much better he is. They were using my poverty to highlight their wealth. They were using my aimlessness to highlight Grant's focus. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My knuckles turned white. They thought the silence was submission. They thought my lack of defense was an admission of defeat. They had no idea that in the years since that barbecue, in the silence of my apartment, I had become something they could not even comprehend. They were playing a social game of checkers, moving pieces around a board to capture territory in Charleston society. They did not know I had already bought the board, the table, and the building they were playing in. I glanced at my phone sitting on the passenger seat. A notification popped up from my banking app, a quarterly dividend deposit. The number was long, 7 figures. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was a child. Grant wanted me to see the real world. He wanted to offer me a job answering phones. The sadness of the flashbacks began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was done being the prop. I was done being the before picture. I signaled to turn onto the highway. The city lights of Charleston blurred past me. Next time, I would not just attend the gala. I would not just buy the ticket. Next time, they would realize that the person they were mocking was the only reason the lights were on. This was no longer just a family dynamic. It was a hostile takeover, and I had the controlling share. The machinery of my humiliation had been set in motion exactly 72 hours before I stepped into Maison Laurent. It began with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. My phone vibrated against the mahogany surface of my desk. I was in the middle of a deep-dive code review, cross-referencing latency protocols for a new logistics hub we were onboarding in Singapore. The screen lit up with a photo of Grant. It was a picture he had uploaded himself. Of course, a professional headshot where he was looking off into the middle distance, pretending to ponder the complexities of the global market. I debated ignoring it. My time was currently billed at a rate that would make Grant choke on his scotch. But I knew that if I did not answer, he would call our mother, and she would call me in a panic, assuming I had been evicted or arrested. I picked up. "Hello? Grant? Peyton? Hey?" Grant's voice was loud, booming with the false cheer of a man who loves the sound of his own benevolence. "Listen, I am just leaving the office. Wanted to touch base about Friday." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, rubbing my temples. "What about Friday?" "Well, you know it is a big night. Camille is, well, she is used to a certain standard. We are going to Maison Laurent." "I know." "Grant, Mom sent the calendar invite." "Right. Good." Grant paused, and I could hear the sound of his car door closing. He lowered his voice, adopting a tone that was equal parts conspiratorial and condescending. "Look, I sent you a little something on Venmo just now. $600. I stared at the phone. $600. To Grant, this was a generous allowance. To me, it was less than what I paid per hour for the forensic accountants currently scrubbing my company ledgers for an upcoming audit. "What is this for?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "Buy yourself a dress." "Peyton," he said, sighing as if the mere act of explaining this was exhausting labor. "And maybe get your hair done. I know things are tight for you, and I do not want you stressing about the cost. I want you to look presentable. We are going to be taking photos. Presentable." The word hung in the air like a stale odor. He did not say beautiful. He did not say nice. He said presentable, as if I were a piece of furniture that needed to be reupholstered before guests arrived. "Thank you, Grant," I said. I knew the script. I had to play the grateful recipient of his charity. "And Peyton," he added, his voice sharpening, "there is one more thing. Go ahead. Let us keep the conversation light on Friday." "Okay. Do not bore Camille with your computer stuff." "My computer stuff. She is a partner at Redwood Crest. Peyton, she deals with real founders, unicorns, people who are actually moving the needle in the tech space. If you start talking about your little freelance gigs or whatever app you're tinkering with, it is just going to be awkward. She will be polite because she has class. But frankly, you are not in the same league. I do not want you to embarrass yourself." I felt a cold smile spread across my face, invisible to him. He was worried I would bore her. He was worried I would expose my lack of sophistication. "I understand," I said softly. "I will keep it quiet." "Good girl," Grant said. "Just follow my lead. Ask her about her travels. Ask her about the market if you want, but just listen. Do not try to chime in with opinions. It is better if you just act impressed. I will do my best. Grant. All right. See you Friday. Do not be late. And seriously, buy a dress that fits. The line went dead. I set the phone down. A moment later, the notification popped up on my screen. Grant Monroe paid you $600. Note, for the big night. I did not accept the transfer. I just let it sit there, a digital monument to his arrogance. I turned my chair back to my desk. The contrast between Grant's perception of my life and the reality of my afternoon was so stark, it was almost disorienting. On my primary monitor, I had a term sheet open. It was 80 pages long. It detailed a strategic Series B funding round that valued Kestrel Grid at a number that would have made my father's boutique firm look like a lemonade stand. The document was a fortress of legal language, protected by non-disclosure agreements so thick they could stop a bullet. I was not just tinkering. I was currently negotiating with two of the largest shipping conglomerates in the Northern Hemisphere. They were fighting over who would get exclusive access to our predictive modeling for the next fiscal year. I clicked open my calendar. My schedule for the rest of the week was a minefield of high-stakes engagements. Wednesday video conference with legal counsel in New York regarding intellectual property defense. Thursday, final review of the quarterly audit with my CFO. Friday morning, a confidential briefing with a government contractor interested in licensing our security protocols. And then, Friday night, dinner with Grant. To be told I was not in the same league as real founders. The irony was not just rich, it was decadent. I minimized the term sheet and opened a new tab. I navigated to LinkedIn. I rarely posted there. My profile was deliberately vague, listing me only as an independent consultant with no photo, but I used a burner account to monitor market trends and, occasionally, my family's digital footprint. I went to Grant's profile. He had posted an update 4 hours ago. It was a long, rambling paragraph filled with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and paradigm shift. The post read, truly inspired by the rumors coming out of the tech sector this week. The work being done by the team at Kestrel Grid regarding supply chain automation is nothing short of visionary. Their CEO, the mysterious PER, is rewriting the rules of logistics. This is the kind of forward-thinking leadership we value at Monroe Consulting. We are actively seeking to bridge the gap between traditional finance and this new wave of digital genius. Can't wait to see what the future holds. Leadership innovation, Kestrel Grid visionary. I laughed out loud. The sound echoed in my empty apartment. Grant was fanboying over me. He was calling me a visionary and a genius on a public platform, while privately calling me to send me charity money for a dress so I would not look like a peasant. I looked closer at the post. He had tagged Camille Rourke in the comments. Thought you would find this interesting. Camille. He had written, this is exactly the kind of asset class we were discussing over drinks last night. PR is the one to watch. He was using my reputation, my professional alter ego, to flirt with his fiancée. He was trying to prove his intellect to her by associating himself with the very person he had spent a lifetime belittling. The levels of deception were staggering. My father and Grant were selling a lie to their clients. I knew for a fact, based on industry gossip, that Monroe Consulting had been trying to get a meeting with Kestrel Grid for 6 months. They were desperate. Their old-school portfolio was underperforming, and they needed a tech win to show their investors they were still relevant. They had been calling my general inquiry line. They had been emailing my info address. They had no idea those emails were being routed directly to a server that sat 10 feet away from where I slept. My computer chimed again. This time it was a secure message from my executive assistant, Sarah. She was the only person, aside from my lawyers, who knew the full extent of the disconnect between my personal life and my professional status. The message read, incoming call from Monroe Consulting. Richard Monroe's office again. They are asking for a direct line to the CEO. They claim they have a personal connection to the founder. This is the 3rd time this week. Do you want me to block the number or send a cease and desist for harassment? I stared at the message. They claimed a personal connection. That was the funniest part. They did have a personal connection. They had the most personal connection possible. They had changed the CEO's diapers. They had paid for the CEO's braces. They had mocked the CEO at every holiday dinner for the last decade, but they did not know that. To them, PER was a golden idol, a faceless deity of success that they wanted to pray to. To them, Peyton was just the dust on their shoes. I typed a reply to Sarah. Do not block them. I wrote, do not answer. Sarah replied instantly, no. I typed back, take a message. Tell them the CEO is aware of their interest and is currently evaluating their suitability as partners. Be polite. Give them hope. Understood. Sarah replied, playing the long game. Something like that. I wrote, I closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. I did not look like a failure. I did not look like a charity case. I looked like a woman who was holding a royal flush while her opponents were betting their houses on a pair of twos. Grant wanted me to be quiet at dinner. He wanted me to listen to the adults talk. He wanted me to witness real success. I stood up and walked to my closet. I pushed aside the utilitarian clothes I wore to blend in and reached for the back, where I kept a single garment bag. Inside was a dress I had bought in Milan after closing my first 7-figure deal. It was simple, black, and cost more than Grant's car. I would not wear it. Not this time. I would wear the dress Grant expected. I would take his $600. I would play the role of the little sister, the hobbyist, the disappointment. Because if I revealed myself now, the game would end too quickly. I needed them to dig the hole deeper. I needed them to be so confident in their superiority that they would say things they could never take back. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Grant. Thanks for the money. Grant, I will make sure I don't embarrass you. See you Friday. I hit send. Let them talk about the legendary CEO. Let them worship P. Let them chase the ghost. Friday night was not just going to be a dinner, it was going to be a masterclass in dramatic irony, and I had a front row seat. Most people think the life of a tech CEO is all launch parties, magazine covers, and ringing the opening bell at the stock exchange. They imagine a world of sleek glass offices and assistants who hand you sparkling water before you even know you are thirsty. But that is the movie version. That is the version my brother Grant thinks he lives in, despite being middle management at a firm that barely breaks 8 figures a year. My reality, the reality of the hobby my family mocked, looked very different. It usually started at 3:14 in the morning. That was the time the markets opened in London, and it was the time my primary servers in brave new data centers across the Atlantic did their heavy lifting. The night before the dinner at Maison Laurent, I was not getting a beauty sleep. I was sitting on my kitchen floor in an oversized t-shirt, nursing a mug of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago, staring at a dashboard that monitored global shipping routes. My company is called Kestrel Grid. To the uninitiated, it looks like a boring database. To the people who actually run the world, the logistics managers for major retailers, the port authorities in Shanghai and Rotterdam, the procurement officers for automotive giants, it is oxygen. We use machine learning to predict supply chain fractures before they happen. When a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, my code tells companies how to reroute their cargo before the news even hits CNN. We are not an app. We are the central nervous system for about 12% of the transatlantic freight trade, but nobody knows I run it. In the industry, the CEO of Kestrel Grid is known simply as PIR. It started as a privacy preference. When I first launched the code, I was still living in a shared apartment, and I did not want my landlord raising the rent because he saw my name in a TechCrunch article. But as the company grew, the anonymity became a strategic weapon. There is a competitor in our space, a massive legacy corporation called Ironclad Systems. They are the dinosaurs we are driving into extinction. 2 years ago, when they realized Kestrel Grid was eating their market share, they did not try to build a better product. They tried to destroy us. They launched a smear campaign, tried to poach my engineers, and even hired private investigators to dig up dirt on the leadership team. That was when I locked my identity in a vault. By remaining PR, I became a ghost. They could not blackmail me. They could not dig through my trash. They could not pressure my family to get to me. My anonymity was not shyness. It was a firewall. My legal team is based in Atlanta. They are sharks in expensive suits who bill me $800 an hour to be paranoid on my behalf. The morning of the dinner, I had a briefing with my lead counsel, Marcus Peyton. Marcus had said, his voice crackling over the encrypted line. We are entering the quiet period for the Series C negotiations. If Ironclad finds out who you are right now, they will use it. They will find a way to sue you personally, freeze your assets, or just create a media circus to spook the investors. You need to be a ghost. Do not sign anything. Do not talk business with anyone who has not been vetted by us. I understand. Marcus. I had replied. I mean it. He pressed. If you go to this family dinner tonight, you talk about the weather. You talk about sports. If they ask about work, you tell them you are struggling. That part is easy. I told him. They already think I am a failure. Good, Marcus said. Let them think that. Their ignorance is your shield. That was the irony that kept me warm at night. My family's arrogance was actually my greatest asset. Because they thought so little of me. They never looked close enough to see the truth. If Richard or Grant had ever actually asked to see my little app, if they had ever shown genuine interest and looked at the interface for 5 seconds, they would have seen client logos that would have made their heads spin. But they never looked. They only judged. I lived in a duality that was becoming harder to maintain. My bank account balance sat comfortably in the 8 figures. My liquid assets alone could have paid off my parents' mortgage and bought Grant's entire firm with enough left over to purchase a private island. Yet, I shopped at thrift stores. This was not because I was stingy. It was because I had learned that in my family, money was not a resource. It was a performance. My father bought cars he could not afford to impress neighbors he did not like. Grant bought watches on credit to signal a success he had not earned. I chose to opt out of that circus. I drove a dented sedan because it got me from point A to point B, and because nobody tries to pitch a bad investment scheme to a woman driving a beat-up Honda. I remember one specific instance when I almost broke character. It was 3 years ago. I had just closed my first major contract, a $500,000 licensing deal. I was so proud. I wanted to share it. I went to my parents' house for Sunday brunch, ready to tell them that maybe, just maybe, I knew what I was doing. Before I could speak, Richard started complaining about a bad stock tip he had followed. He was angry. He was talking about needing cash flow. He looked at me and said, "It is a good thing you do not have any real money to worry about. Peyton, the market is a bloodbath. You are lucky you have nothing to lose." I saw the hunger in his eyes. It was not the look of a father who would be proud of his daughter's success. It was the look of a man who would see my money as his own lifeboat. If I told him I had $500,000, he would have bullied me into investing it in his firm. He would have guilted me. He would have taken over. So I swallowed the truth. I ate my eggs and let him believe I was broke. And now, here I was, preparing for the biggest night of Grant's life, armed with the knowledge that I was the very thing they all aspired to be. The afternoon of the dinner, I was working from my home office. My desk was a chaotic landscape of hard drives, coffee cups, and legal pads. I was reviewing the diligence report for a potential acquisition. My computer chimed. It was Sarah, my executive assistant who worked remotely from Seattle. Sarah was the gatekeeper. She filtered the noise so I could focus on the signal. Peyton. Her message read, "We have a situation with the calendar." I typed back, "What kind of situation?" "It is about the meeting requests for next month." She wrote, "I am scrubbing the list of venture capital firms wanting FaceTime with P&R, and I have a persistent flag here. There is a fund that has been trying to get on your schedule for 7 months. They have sent 14 emails. They have called the main line 6 times. They are aggressive." I took a sip of my cold coffee. "Which fund? Redwood Crest Capital?" Sarah replied. I stopped typing. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. Redwood Crest Capital. Camille Rourke's firm. "Who is the point of contact?" I asked. Though I already had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. "The lead partner is a woman named Camille Rourke." Sarah confirmed. She is very insistent. She says she has analyzed our market penetration and believes Kestrel Grid is the missing link in their tech portfolio. She called us a unicorn in hiding in her last email. She wants to fly to meet PR anywhere in the world. She offered to sign a unilateral NDA just to get a coffee with you. I leaned back in my chair, the mesh digging into my shoulders. Camille Rourke had been hunting me for 7 months. This changed everything. This was not just Grant trying to impress his fiancée with a fake connection. This was professional. Camille was not just a passive participant in tonight's dinner. She was an active seeker of the truth I was hiding. If Camille knew who I was, she would not see a sister-in-law. She would see a target. She would see the deal of her career. Stall her. I typed back to Sarah. Tell her the CEO is traveling. Tell her we are in a quiet period. Do not give her a no, but do not give her a yes. Understood. Sarah replied. But Peyton, she is smart. Her emails are detailed. She has figured out parts of our architecture just by observing our API traffic. She is getting close. I know. I wrote, I will handle it. I closed the chat window and stared at the screen. The stakes had just multiplied. Tonight, I was not just walking into a family dinner to be mocked. I was walking into a room with a woman who had spent the better part of a year trying to hunt me down. Camille was sharp. Grant was a blunted instrument. But Camille was a scalpel. If I slipped up, if I used the wrong terminology, if I showed too much knowledge of the market, if I reacted to a piece of news with the insight of a CEO rather than the indifference of a hobbyist, she would know. She would put the pieces together. I stood up and walked to the mirror in my hallway. I looked tired. Good. That fit the narrative. I looked like a woman who stayed up too late playing on the computer. I practiced my smile. It had to be weak. It had to be apologetic. I am just doing some freelance stuff. Camille, nothing big. Oh, the supply chain. I do not really understand it. I just write the code. I had to dumb myself down. I had to shrink. I had to become the small, insignificant thing they needed me to be. But inside, my heart was racing with a different kind of energy. It was the thrill of the hunt. Camille Rourke wanted to meet PNER. She wanted to sit down with the visionary behind Kestrel Grid Well. She was about to get her wish. She was going to spend 3 hours sitting directly across from me. She just would not know it. And when she finally found out, when the curtain finally fell, the look on her face was going to be worth every single second of silence I had endured for the last 10 years. I grabbed my purse, checked my phone one last time to ensure all notifications were silenced, and headed out the door. The hobbyist was going to dinner, but the CEO was going to war. The waiter removed the appetizer plates with the silent efficiency of a phantom, leaving only the polished mahogany table between us as a battleground. The air in the private room had shifted. The initial pleasantries were gone, replaced by a tension that felt thick and electric, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I could feel Camille Rourke's eyes on me. She had stopped looking at Grant. She had stopped looking at the diamond ring on her finger. For the last 10 minutes, her entire focus had narrowed down to the woman sitting across from her in the charcoal blazer. My brother, Grant, seemed to sense the shift but not the cause. He kept filling the silence with nervous chatter about the wedding venue in Tuscany and the logistical nightmare of flying our grandmother out first class. But Camille was not listening. She was hunting. So, Peyton, Camille said, cutting through Grant's monologue about truffle oil. Her voice was casual, but her eyes were sharp. You mentioned earlier that your project involves supply chain logistics. That is a notoriously difficult sector to crack. The legacy systems are entrenched. I took a sip of water, buying myself 3 seconds to calibrate my answer. This was the test. If I answered like a hobbyist, she would lose interest. If I answered like the CEO of Kestrel Grid, she would figure it out. I had to walk the razor's edge. It is definitely crowded, I said, keeping my tone light, but most of the old systems run on on-premise servers. They are clunky. I'm just playing around with some cloud-based solutions. Nothing major. Camille did not blink. Cloud-native architecture reduces overhead, she said. Smart. But what about data integrity? If you are dealing with shipping manifests, you have to worry about latency. How do you handle the real-time tracking lag? My father, Richard, let out a loud, dismissive sigh. He swirled his wine, looking bored. Oh, Camille, do not get her started. Peyton loves to use big words, but at the end of the day, she is just fixing computer bugs for local shops. She helps the dry cleaner keep track of his shirts. Grant laughed, a harsh sound that grated on my nerves. Yeah, she is basically the IT guy you call when your printer jams. I saw Camille's jaw tighten. She ignored them completely, her gaze still locked on mine. Latency is a problem, I admitted, allowing a sliver of technical truth to slip through. But if you use edge computing, you can process the data closer to the source. It helps. Camille's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch. Edge computing, that is an expensive infrastructure for a hobby project. Who is funding your server costs? I felt a bead of sweat prickle at my hairline. She was good. She was digging for the financials. She knew that a little app did not use edge computing protocols unless it had serious capital behind it. I just bootstrap it. I said, using the term intentionally, it is small scale. Grant interrupted again, his voice rising in pitch. He slammed his hand on the table, not in anger, but in a desperate attempt to regain control of the room. Okay, enough shop talk. My God, you two are putting me to sleep. Camille, babe, look at the menu. The sea bass here is supposed to be life-changing. Camille did not look at the menu. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Tell me about your user acquisition. Peyton, she said, is it organic? Or are you paying for leads? I hesitated. This was a founder question. This was the kind of question she asked when she was deciding whether to write a check for $5 million. My mother, Evelyn, decided it was time to save the dinner from my boring existence. She reached out and patted Camille's hand. Oh, honey, you give Peyton too much credit, Evelyn said with a tragic smile. She does not have users. She has, what do you call them? Peyton friends, people she meets on forums, clients, I said quietly. Evelyn waved her hand as if shooing away a fly. Whatever you call them. The point is, Peyton is still exploring. She changes interests every few years. Remember the photography phase, Richard, and the time she wanted to be a writer, she is a dreamer. Camille, not a doer like Grant. Richard nodded solemnly, looking at me with a performance of paternal disappointment. It is true. We have tried to get her to settle down, get a corporate job, something with a 401k, but she is difficult. She does not like authority. She thinks she knows better than the people who have been in business for 30 years. I gripped the stem of my water glass. The narrative they were spinning was so complete, so impervious to reality, that it was almost impressive. They were painting a portrait of a flighty, incompetent child, while the woman who managed a company with a 90% retention rate sat right in front of them. Camille looked at Richard, then back to me. Her expression had shifted from curiosity to confusion. The data points were not aligning. The woman speaking about edge computing did not match the dreamer her parents were describing. It must be hard, Camille said, her voice dropping to a murmur, doing it all without support. I looked up, surprised. For a second, I thought she had cracked the code. But Evelyn jumped in before I could respond. Support, we support her constantly. We pay for her. Emergencies. We are always there when she fails. And frankly, Camille, my only hope for Peyton now is that she finds a good man, someone stable, someone who can take care of her so she stops worrying about these silly little projects. The table went silent. Camille slowly placed her fork down on her plate. It made a sharp clatter. She looked at Evelyn with a coldness that could have frozen the wine in our glasses. A man to take care of her. Camille repeated. Yes, Evelyn said, oblivious to the temperature drop. You know how it is. A woman needs security. Grant provides that for you, and we just want the same for Peyton. Camille turned her head to look at Grant. She stared at him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time without the filter of his charm. Grant looked panicked. He cleared his throat loudly. Well, speaking of security, Grant said, his voice straining for joviality, that actually reminds me of a little favor I need to ask you. Peyton. He reached under the table and pulled out a leather portfolio. He placed it on the white tablecloth and slid it toward me. It is just a formality. Really, Grant said, flashing a winning smile that looked more like a grimace. Since you are here, and family is all together, I need a witness signature for some of the engagement paperwork. You know, just confirming that we are us. He laughed nervously. Engagement paperwork, I asked. I had never heard of a witness being needed for an engagement unless it was a prenuptial agreement. And even then, lawyers handled it, not sisters at a dinner table. Grant waved his hand dismissively. It is just a clause about asset commingling. Standard stuff. Dad said it would be easier if you signed it since you are a neutral party. I looked at the folder. It was thick. Too thick for a simple witness form. Camille was watching closely. Her eyes narrowed. Why would you need Peyton to sign asset papers? Grant, my lawyers haven't sent over the prenup drafts yet. Grant froze. This is internal. For the Monroe Trust. Just housekeeping. I opened the folder. The first page was standard legal boilerplate, but my eyes, trained to scan contracts at high speed, caught the logo in the top right corner. It was not a family trust logo. It was not a law firm's letterhead. It was a watermark for a digital compliance firm. I flipped to the second page. The text was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Third-party authorization, data sovereignty waiver, access to intellectual property held by familial affiliates. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not engagement paperwork. This was a backdoor access agreement. If I signed this, I would be granting Grant, and by extension, his firm legal permission to access any and all digital assets hosted on private servers residing at the signatory's primary residence. They were trying to hack me legally. They knew I had something. They did not know it was Kestrel Grid, but they knew I had data. Maybe they thought I had stumbled onto a client list. Maybe they thought I had developed a small algorithm they could steal and sell to a bigger firm. They assumed I was too stupid to read the fine print. They assumed I would just sign where my big brother pointed because I was the dreamer who needed guidance. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It was sharper than the humiliation from earlier. Humiliation is emotional. This was business. This was an attempt to steal my life's work under the guise of family bonding. I looked up. Grant was watching me, his forehead glistening with sweat. Richard was pretending to look at the wine list, but his eyes were darting toward the folder. I did not sign. I closed the folder slowly and placed my hand on top of it. Who drafted this? Grant, I asked. My voice was soft, but it carried across the table like a gunshot. Grant blinked. What I told you. The family attorney. It is just procedure. No, I said, this is not procedure. This is a waiver for digital IP access. Why would the Monroe Trust need access to my personal server logs? Grant's face turned a shade of red that clashed with the curtains. You are reading it wrong. You always overcomplicate things. Just sign the damn paper. Peyton, do it for the family. Camille's voice cut through the air. Let me see it. Grant whipped his head toward her. No, babe, it is boring legalese. You do not want to bother with it. Camille extended her hand across the table. Her fingers were steady. Show me the document. Grant, Richard intervened, his voice booming. Now, Camille, this is a private family matter regarding the estate. Peyton is just being difficult, as usual. Peyton, stop making a scene and sign the document. We are trying to celebrate your brother. I looked at my father. I saw the greed behind the bluster. He thought he was tricking a child. He did not realize he was trying to con a shark. I am not signing, I said, and then I smiled. It was the first real smile I had worn all evening. Because if you want access to my hobby, I said, looking directly at Grant, you are going to have to pay the subscription fee like everyone else. The table went deadly silent. Camille looked from Grant to Richard, and then to the folder under my hand. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place behind her eyes. She realized that the charity case sister was being targeted. She realized that the standard procedure was a lie, and for the first time, she looked at me not with pity or suspicion, but with a dawning, terrified respect. She knew. She did not know what I was yet, but she knew I was the one holding the cards. I excused myself from the table. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told them I needed to use the ladies' room, a polite fiction that bought me exactly 5 minutes of operational silence. As I walked away, I felt Grant's eyes boring into my back, likely calculating whether I was going to run away or come back and sign his fraudulent document like a good little sister. I pushed into the restroom. It was an opulent space with marble floors and gold-leafed mirrors, empty save for the faint sound of classical music piped in from the ceiling. I locked myself in the furthest stall and immediately pulled out my phone. Before I had closed the folder at the table, I had used the lens of my smart glasses, a prototype from a hardware partner in Shenzhen, that looked like ordinary prescription frames to capture a high-resolution image of the document. It was a habit I had picked up during the early days of corporate espionage threats against Kestrel Grid. I synced the frames to my phone and forwarded the image to Marcus, my lead counsel in Atlanta. Urgent. I typed, Review Clause 4.2 regarding third-party IP assignment. Grant just tried to make me sign this under the guise of engagement paperwork. I watched the 3 dots of the typing indicator appear almost instantly. Marcus was likely at dinner with his own family, but he had a dedicated alert for me. The reply came through 30 seconds later. Do not sign that, Marcus wrote. This is not a standard trust agreement. This is a blind power of attorney for digital assets. Specifically, it grants the holder the right to access, duplicate, and license any intellectual property stored on devices residing at the signatory's primary address. It is a sweep clause. They are trying to clone your hard drive legally. I leaned back against the cold stall door. A sweep clause. They were not just trying to peek at my diary, they were trying to scrape my servers. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, the scattered pieces of the last few months clicked into a terrifyingly clear picture. It was like watching a complex algorithm finally resolve. 3 weeks ago, Richard had mentioned to a client at the club, loudly enough for the bartender to hear and repeat to my local sources, that Monroe Consulting was on the verge of a strategic partnership with a major data firm. He had implied he had an inside track. He had sold a promise he could not keep. Then there was Grant, his sudden interest in my life. His questions about who I was working for and what kind of access I had. They did not know I was the CEO. They were too arrogant to imagine that. But they suspected I was a cog in the machine. They likely thought I was a low-level coder or a sysadmin for Kestrel Grid or a similar company. They assumed that because I was struggling and working from home, I was probably handling sensitive data for a bigger entity. They wanted to use me as a mule. The plan was simple and devastating. Get me to sign a document that looked like family housekeeping. Use that legal authority to seize my laptop or force me to hand over passwords. Scrape the data. Find a client list, a piece of proprietary code, or the holy grail, a direct contact email for the elusive CEO, PR. Then, they would take that stolen information and trade it. They would go to Redwood Crest or Ironclad Systems and say, Look what we found. Look who we can get you a meeting with. They were selling access to me, without knowing it was me. My phone buzzed again. It was Sarah, my assistant. Peyton. She wrote, I just cross-referenced the IP address that has been pinging our firewall for the last week. It is not a hacker from Russia. It is coming from a static IP registered to Monroe Consulting Group in Charlotte. They have been trying to brute force our employee portal. They are desperate. I let out a breath that shook with rage. They were hacking me. My own father and brother were actively trying to break into my company while smiling at me over dinner and telling me to find a husband. I flushed the toilet just for the sound, washed my hands with trembling precision, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was not Peyton the failure. She was PR, and PR did not tolerate corporate espionage. I walked back to the dining room. The walk felt different this time. The floor did not feel like a path to the gallows. It felt like a runway. When I re-entered the private room, the atmosphere was brittle. Grant was downing a glass of scotch like it was water. Richard was aggressively buttering a roll. Camille was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, staring at the empty chair where I had been sitting. I sat down. I did not pick up my napkin. I placed my hands flat on the table. right next to the leather folder that contained their betrayal. Grant looked at me, hope and fear warring in his eyes. So you feel better, ready to get that signature out of the way so we can order dessert. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat on his upper lip. I am not signing it. Grant, I said. Richard slammed his butter knife down. For God's sake. Peyton, it is a formality. Why do you always have to be so difficult? We are trying to protect your future assets. My future assets? I repeated. Or yours? Richard's face reddened. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, keeping my voice low and level, that Clause 4, Section 2 allows Monroe Consulting to license any digital property I create. It means you are trying to claim ownership of my work. Grant laughed. A high-pitched, nervous sound. Your work, Peyton. Nobody wants your little freelance spreadsheets. We are just trying to make sure that if you stumble into something liable, the family trust protects you. Liable. I said, you mean valuable. Camille turned her head sharply. She looked at Grant. Is that true? She asked. Her voice was ice. Does the document transfer IP rights? Grant stammered. It is standard language. It is just in case. You know, in case she helps us with IT stuff later. It simplifies the billing. Camille picked up the folder. Grant tried to reach for it, but she pulled it away. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the page I had refused to sign. She was a venture capitalist. She read contracts for a living. It took her less than 10 seconds to find the trap. She looked up, her expression one of pure disgust. This is a sweep clause, she said. She looked at Richard. You are trying to get power of attorney over her data. Why? Richard waved his hand dismissively. You do not understand family business. Camille, she is prone to mistakes. We need to supervise her digital footprint. It is for her own good. Camille dropped the folder onto the table. It slid across the mahogany and hit my water glass with a chime. You are fishing, Camille said. She looked at Richard with a terrifying clarity. You are looking for a back door. You think she has access to something. Don't you? Richard stiffened. I do not know what you are talking about. Yes, you do, Camille said. She leaned in. You have been telling everyone in town you have a lead on the Kestrel grid deal. You told my partners at Redwood Crest that you had a familial entry point to the company. I stayed silent. I let the accusation hang in the air. Camille turned to me. Her eyes were searching my face, looking for the connection. They think you work for Kestrel Grid, don't they? Peyton, she asked softly. They think you are an employee, and they are trying to steal your login credentials legally so they can pitch the CEO. I did not confirm it. I did not deny it. I just held her gaze. Grant exploded. So what if we are? He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is wasting her time on that computer all day. If she actually has a job with a real company, she should be sharing that access with us. We are her family. Monroe Consulting could leverage that connection into millions, but she is too selfish to help. She would rather let us struggle while she plays secretary for some tech nerd. There it was, the confession. They did not just think I was a failure. They thought I was a holding out on them. They believed they had a right to harvest my life for parts. I looked at Grant. You wanted to use my access to impress Camille. I said, you wanted to hand her the CEO of Kestrel Grid as a wedding present. Grant sneered. It would have been a smart business move. Something you would know nothing about. Camille looked at Grant like he was something she had stepped in on the sidewalk. You were going to use your sister as a Trojan horse to manipulate my firm, she said. Grant reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. Babe, it is business. It is aggressive. You like aggressive. I do not like fraud. Camille spat. Richard tried to salvage the wreck. Now, let us all calm down. Nobody is stealing anything. We just thought, look, Peyton is not doing anything important with her access. Why let it go to waste if she can help the firm? She should. It is her duty. And then, Evelyn spoke. My mother had been silent during the exchange, picking at her napkin, looking distressed not by the betrayal, but by the volume of the conversation. She looked up now, her eyes wet with tears of frustration. She looked at me, and with a voice trembling with genuine, misguided sincerity, She delivered the line that severed the last thread connecting me to them. "Peyton, please," she said, "just sign the paper. Your father is under so much pressure. If you are not going to make anything of yourself, if you are not going to do anything that makes us proud." She paused, wiping her eye. "Then the least you can do is help the family succeed. If you cannot be successful, give your brother the tools so he can be—" The room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "If I cannot be successful, I should give my brother the tools so he can be—" It was not just an insult. It was a declaration of ownership. She was saying that my only purpose in life, if I could not be a trophy, was to be a ladder for Grant to climb. I was a resource. I was fuel to be burned so the golden child could stay warm. I looked at Evelyn. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, and I felt absolutely nothing. No pain, no sadness, just the cold, clinical detachment of a CEO deciding to liquidate a failing division. "I see," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gavel coming down. Camille was looking at Evelyn with her mouth slightly open. She looked horrified. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flash of genuine solidarity. She realized she was marrying into a nest of vipers. I picked up the folder. Grant's eyes lit up. "You will sign it." I stood up. I held the folder in my hands. "No," I said. "I am keeping this." "Hey," Grant shouted. "That is my property. It is evidence," I said. I slid the folder into my bag, and I think my legal team in Atlanta will find it very interesting. "Legal team," Richard scoffed. "You mean the public defender?" I did not answer. I turned to Camille. "I think I have lost my appetite," I said. "But you should ask Richard about that familial entry point to Kestrel Grid. Ask him exactly who he thinks the CEO is." I turned to walk away, but I stopped. I needed to twist the knife one last time. I needed them to know that the hunt was over, and they were the prey. "Oh, and Grant," I said, looking back over my shoulder. What he snapped. "If you are looking for PR," I said, "do not look in the employee directory. You are looking in the wrong tax bracket." I walked out of the room, leaving them in a silence that was heavy with the impending collapse of their entire world. I had not told them the truth yet, not fully, but I had lit the fuse. Now, all I had to do was wait for the explosion. I had barely made it 3 steps into the corridor. The heavy folder tucked under my arm like a weapon. When I heard the click of heels on the parquet floor behind me, they were fast, rhythmic, and purposeful. It was not the sound of a mother coming to scold a child. It was the sound of a partner coming to close a deal. "Peyton, wait." I stopped and turned. Camille Rourke was standing in the doorway of the private dining room, the light from the crystal chandelier framing her silhouette. She had left her purse and her wineglass at the table. She had come out for answers. She walked toward me, closing the distance until we were standing in the quiet, dim hallway lined with vintage French posters. She did not look angry. She looked like she was trying to solve a complex equation that had just been written on a blackboard in invisible ink. "I am not going back in there to sign that." "Camille," I said, keeping my voice low, "if that is what Grant sent you to do, you can save your breath." Camille shook her head, a sharp, dismissive motion. "I am not here for Grant. I am here because I saw the way you read that document." She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that was intimate yet entirely professional. "You scanned a 6-page legal addendum in under 40 seconds. Peyton, you identified a sweep clause that was buried in dense boilerplate text, and you knew exactly what the implications were regarding IP sovereignty." She paused, searching my eyes. "My analysts take hours to catch things like that. You did it between sips of water. You are not a hobbyist. You are not a receptionist. So, I am going to ask you one time, woman to woman, who are you really?" I looked at her. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of respect. She was not just a trophy. She was a hunter. Just like me. But she was hunting in the dark, and I was the one holding the flashlight. I am just someone who values her privacy. "Camille," I said evasively. Camille let out a short, frustrated breath. She looked around the empty hallway to ensure we were alone. Then she leaned in, her eyes intense. Look, I do not know what game your family is playing, but I know my business. At Redwood Crest, we are currently in the middle of the most aggressive diligence process of my career. We are trying to acquire a stake in a company called Kestrel Grid. My pulse spiked, but I kept my face frozen. Oh, yes, she continued, the words tumbling out now that she had opened the floodgates. The technology is brilliant. It is shifting the entire logistics paradigm, but the CEO, this PR character, is a ghost. We have thrown everything at them. 7 months of emails, phone calls. I have flown my team to 3 different continents chasing leads. I have never seen a founder work this hard to stay hidden. She looked at me, her expression a mix of admiration and annoyance. Grant told me his father had a connection. That is why I agreed to come to this dinner. I thought maybe your father was the bridge. But after watching them tonight, after seeing how they treat you, I do not think they know anything. I think they are grasping at straws. She was so close to the truth it was almost painful. She was confessing her pursuit of me, to me. Why does it matter, I asked quietly, if the technology is good? Why do you need the person? Camille straightened up, smoothing the front of her dress. Her demeanor shifted back to the boardroom executive. Because technology is easily replicated. Peyton, code can be copied, algorithms can be reverse engineered, but vision resilience, that is human. I need to know who is driving the bus. I need to look them in the eye and see if they have the steel to handle the pressure when the market turns. I do not invest in code. I invest in character. I stared at her. I invest in character. It was exactly the kind of thing I would have said. I took a half step toward her. And if you found this CEO, I asked, if you were standing right in front of PR, right now, what would you do? Camille laughed. A dry, humorless sound. I would interview them. I would tear them apart to see what they are made of. I would test their patience. I would test their intelligence. I would see if they can handle an insult without losing their cool. I smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. Then you are in luck. Camille, I said softly. She frowned. What do you mean, I said, locking eyes with her, that you are already doing it. Camille froze. The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. She stared at me, her mind racing, replaying the entire evening, the insults, my silence, the hobby, the refusal to sign, the legal knowledge. I could see the gears turning, the impossible conclusion trying to force its way through the logic of what she had been told by my family. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask the question that was hanging on her lips. But at that moment, the door to the private room swung open. Richard stepped out. He looked flushed, his tie slightly askew, a forced smile plastered on his face. There you two are. He boomed, his voice too loud for the quiet corridor. We were getting worried. Grant was afraid you had run off. Peyton, he walked over to us, placing a heavy hand on Camille's shoulder, steering her back toward the room. Come on, the soufflés are arriving. Peyton, put that folder away. We can discuss the paperwork later when you are feeling less emotional. He shot me a look that was pure venom, a silent warning to get back in line. Camille pulled away from his touch slightly. She did not look at him. She was still looking at me, her eyes wide, her breathing shallow. She looked like someone who had just seen a ghost in broad daylight. We walked back into the room. The atmosphere was stifling. Grant was sitting at the table, picking at his fingernails. When we entered, he jumped up, pulling Camille's chair out with exaggerated chivalry. Everything okay? Grant asked, searching Camille's face. You guys were out there for a while. Camille sat down slowly. She did not pick up her napkin. She placed her hands flat on the table and looked directly at Grant. It was informative. She said, her voice was flat, stripped of the warmth she had shown him earlier. Richard sat back down at the head of the table, clapping his hands together. Excellent. Now, let us put this unpleasantness behind us. Peyton, I hope you have composed yourself. It is very rude to leave guests waiting. He poured himself more wine, the bottle clinking against the glass. You know, Camille, he said, leaning in confidentially, Peyton has always been a bit dramatic, even as a child, always thinking the world was against her. We have had to bail her out of so many scrapes. It is exhausting, really. But we love her. That is what family does. We carry the dead weight. I saw Camille's knuckles turn white. Dead weight. Camille repeated. Richard laughed. Just a figure of speech. But you know what I mean. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues like you and Grant. Some people are just spectators. I picked up my fork. I did not eat. I just held it, feeling the cold metal against my skin. I was done defending myself. I did not need to. I had a new player on the board. Camille turned her head slowly to look at Grant. Grant, she said. Yeah, babe, that document. She said, the one you wanted Peyton to sign. Grant stiffened. What about it? We dropped it. Let us not ruin dessert. Camille did not let it go. You said it was for the engagement. You said it was a witness form. Yeah, Grant said, shifting in his seat. Basically, Camille asked, her voice sharpening, because when I read it, it looked like an assignment of rights. It looked like you were trying to get legal permission to access her personal server. Grant laughed nervously, looking at Richard for help. You are overthinking it. Camille, it is complicated legal stuff. No, Camille said, it is not complicated. It is predatory. Richard slammed his glass down. That is enough. Camille. Excuse me, Camille said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. You are a guest at this table. Richard snapped, his facade of the benevolent patriarch finally cracking. You do not come into my family and start interrogating my son about his business practices. We are trying to protect Peyton from herself. She does not know what she is doing with those computers. If she stumbles into something valuable, she will just lose it or get sued. We are the professionals. We are the ones who know how to monetize assets. Monetize assets, Camille repeated. So you admit it. You think she has something valuable. Richard sneered. I think she is sitting on a gold mine she is too stupid to mine. And yes, as her father, I have a right to the shovel. I sat silently. The confession was out. It was naked and ugly. Camille looked at Richard with pure revulsion. Then she looked at Grant. And you knew this, she asked. You invited her here. You bought her dinner. You pretended to care about her hobby, just so you could trick her into signing away her rights. Grant looked down at his plate. It is not like that. Camille, we are a team. When we get married, my success is your success. If I can close a deal using Peyton's data, it benefits us. It buys the house in the Hamptons. It pays for the lifestyle you want. Camille stood up. She did not scream. She did not throw wine. She simply stood up, towering over Grant, who remained seated like a scolded child. I buy my own houses, Grant, she said, and I do not build my lifestyle on fraud. She looked at Richard. I do not like the smell of manipulation. Richard, and this room stinks of it, Richard sputtered. You are making a mistake. Camille, you are emotional. You are letting Peyton's little act get to you. Camille ignored him. She turned her body toward me. She blocked out the rest of the room. It was just her and me now, amidst the wreckage of the dinner party. She leaned down, placing her hands on the table, bringing her face close to mine so that only I could hear her next words. Her eyes were searching mine, desperate for confirmation, desperate to bridge the gap between the suspicion and the reality. Peyton, she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. I looked up at her, my face impassive. Tell me, she breathed. Please, do you have a connection to Kestrel Grid? Are you the one I have been looking for? The room held its breath. Grant was watching. Richard was watching. They saw Camille leaning in, but they could not hear the question. They thought she was scolding me. They thought she was joining their side. I looked at Camille. I saw the intelligence in her eyes. I saw the realization that she had been sleeping next to a fraud and dining with a genius. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I set it down. I smiled at her. Let us finish eating first, I said. It was not a no. It was not a yes. It was a command. Camille stared at me for 3 seconds. Then, slowly, A shiver seemed to run through her entire body. She understood. She understood that I was not answering because I was afraid. I was answering because I was in control. She sat back down. She picked up her napkin and placed it in her lap. She looked at Grant, then at Richard, and then she picked up her fork. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed adrenaline. "Let us eat." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The tension in the room did not dissipate with the arrival of the main course. Instead, it curdled. The air was thick with unsaid words and the heavy, cloying scent of expensive French sauces. Richard had decided that the best way to handle the near mutiny regarding the legal document was to drown it in vintage Bordeaux. He was on his fourth glass, and the alcohol was stripping away the thin veneer of his gentlemanly persona, revealing the desperate salesman beneath. He was talking louder now, his gestures sweeping and clumsy, knocking against the silverware. He needed to reclaim the narrative. He needed to remind everyone, especially Camille, that the Monroe family was a powerhouse, not a group of petty thieves trying to scavenge data from their daughter. "You know, Camille," Richard boomed, ignoring the fact that she was barely touching her food. "The real money right now isn't in venture capital. It is in strategic partnerships, bridges. That is what Monroe Consulting does. We build bridges." Camille looked at him over the rim of her water glass. Her eyes were flat, like shark eyes before a strike. "Is that so?" she asked. "Absolutely," Richard said, leaning back and unbuttoning his suit jacket. "In fact, we are on the verge of closing something massive, a legacy-defining deal. I probably should not talk about it, but since we are all family here—" He paused for effect, waiting for us to lean in. Nobody moved. "It involves that data firm everyone is whispering about." He whispered loudly, "Kestrel Grid." I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. He was actually doing it. He was lying about my company, to my face. While I sat there eating asparagus, Grant, sensing an opportunity to look important, jumped in immediately. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and nodded vigorously. "Dad is right," Grant said. "We have been cultivating this relationship for months. It has been a grind. You know how these tech founders are. Camille, paranoid, reclusive, especially this PR character." Grant rolled his eyes, performing a pantomime of exhaustion. "PER is a nightmare to get a hold of," Grant continued, fabricating a reality out of thin air. "We have had to jump through so many hoops. But once we got past the gatekeepers, we realized that Monroe Consulting was exactly what they needed to stabilize their market position." I slowly placed my fork down. I looked at Grant. The audacity was breathtaking. He had never spoken to me. He had never received a reply from my assistant. He had been blocked by my firewall. And here he was, describing a relationship that existed entirely in his own delusions of grandeur. Camille turned her head slowly to face Grant. "You are in talks with PER?" she asked. Her voice was dangerously calm. Grant puffed out his chest. "We are in the final stages." "Have you met them?" Camille asked. The question hung in the air. It was a binary trap, yes or no. Grant hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at Richard, then back at Camille. He could not say no, because that would make him look weak. He could not say yes, because Camille might ask for details he did not have. So he chose the middle ground, the refuge of all liars. "We have a meeting scheduled." Grant lied smoothly. "Very soon. It took some doing, but they finally agreed to sit down. We are flying out next week to their headquarters." I almost laughed. Kestrel Grid did not have a headquarters. We were fully distributed. My headquarters was the spare room in my apartment 3 miles away. Camille stared at him. She knew he was lying. I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She had spent 7 months trying to get a meeting. She knew PR did not take meetings with boutique consulting firms from Charlotte. "Next week." Camille repeated, "That is impressive. Grant, PR is known for being invisible." Grant shrugged, feigning modesty. "Well, you know the Monroe charm. We have a way of opening doors." I decided it was time to adjust the temperature of the room. I raised my hand and caught the attention of the waiter who was hovering in the shadows. He hurried over. "Mademoiselle, another glass of water." please, I said clearly, with ice. My voice cut through Grant's bluster. It was calm, precise, and sober. While they were drinking themselves into a fantasy, I was hydrating for the kill. Evelyn, who had been watching me with a mix of pity and annoyance, decided to intervene. She interpreted my request for water as a sign of nervousness. She thought I was overwhelmed by the high-level business talk. "Oh, Peyton, honey," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with that poisonous maternal sweetness. "You look a little lost. I know all this talk about mergers and acquisitions goes over your head." I looked at my mother. "I am following along just fine." "Mom," Evelyn sighed and looked at Camille. "You have to forgive her." "Camille, Peyton tries, but she just does not have the head for business. She gets bored with the details. She is more creative." "Creative," Richard snorted into his wine glass. "That is a polite word for it. Unfocused is more like it." Evelyn patted my hand again. "Do not listen to your father. Peyton, we are proud of you in our own way. Not everyone can be a CEO. Not everyone can be a Grant. The world needs people to do the smaller jobs. You just have to know your limits." "Know your limits." I looked at Camille. She was watching this interaction with a look of pure fascination. But as Evelyn finished speaking, that look shifted. It curdled into something else. Camille looked at Richard, red-faced and boasting about a deal he did not have. She looked at Grant, sweaty and lying about a meeting he would never get. And she looked at Evelyn, smiling while she drove a stake through her daughter's confidence. The look in Camille's eyes was no longer cold. It was contempt. She was not looking at them like they were powerful potential in-laws. She was looking at them like they were bugs, noisy, insignificant insects who thought they owned the garden. And then she looked at me. Her expression softened instantly. It was a look of apology. It was a look that acknowledged the sheer, suffocating weight of the stupidity I had been living under. She knew. She definitely knew. At that exact moment, the phone I had placed face down on the table vibrated. It was a long, sustained buzz that rattled the silverware. Grant, whose nerves were already frayed, jumped slightly. He looked at the phone. "Who is calling you at this hour?" Grant snapped. "Probably a bill collector." I ignored him and reached for the phone. I flipped it over to check the notification. The screen lit up. It was a message from Sarah, my executive assistant. The preview text was visible in large, clear letters against the black background. "Urgent, the Singapore partners want to confirm the 7 a.m. strategy call with CEO PR regarding the merger. Do you want me to send the link?" I read it quickly. My face remained impassive, but Grant had leaned in. He had the instincts of a predator who smells blood, or in this case, the instincts of a jealous sibling who needed to find a flaw. He craned his neck, squinting at the glowing screen. I saw his eyes widen. He saw the word CEO. He saw the name PR. For a split second, his brain tried to process what he was seeing. He did not think I was the CEO. His arrogance would not allow that neural pathway to form. Instead, he jumped to the only conclusion his limited worldview could support. He thought I was messaging about the CEO. He thought I was trying to undercut him. "Hey," Grant said, his voice rising. "Who are you texting?" I saw that I flipped the phone face down immediately, my hand covering it. "It is private. Grant." He pointed a shaking finger at me. I saw the name. It said CEO PR. "Why do you have PR's name on your phone?" The table went silent. Richard froze with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. Evelyn gasped. Grant stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "Are you trying to apply for a job?" Grant shouted, his face twisting with paranoia. "Is that it? You heard us talking about the deal, and now you are trying to sneak in the back door. You are trying to ride my coattails to get an admin job at Kestrel Grid." I looked up at him calmly. "I am not looking for a job." "Grant, then why is that name on your screen?" he demanded. "Show me the message." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Peyton, if you are interfering with your brother's business, I swear to God, you are trying to sabotage me," Grant yelled. "You are jealous because I am about to close the biggest deal of my life, So you are annoying them with your little resume. The irony was so rich I could taste it. He was accusing me of interfering with a deal that did not exist, involving a person he was currently screaming at. I did not move. I did not unlock the phone. I just watched them unravel. They were setting themselves on fire, fueled by their own insecurity. Camille sat perfectly still. She watched Grant screaming. She watched Richard threatening. She watched Evelyn looking horrified that I would embarrass them. She looked at the phone under my hand. She put the final piece of the puzzle into place. Grant saw CEO. I saw CEO. Grant thought I was begging. Camille realized I was commanding. Grant, sit down, Camille said. Her voice was not loud, but it had the authority of a whip crack. No, Grant shouted. She is up to something. I said sit down, Camille repeated. Grant blinked, looking at her. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair, breathing hard. She is trying to ruin this for me, Grant muttered petulantly. Camille ignored him. She ignored Richard. She turned her entire body toward me. She picked up her wineglass, took a sip, and set it down. She clasped her hands together and rested her chin on them, looking directly into my eyes. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and Grant's ragged breathing. Camille tilted her head slightly. Peyton, she said softly. Yes, Camille. I have a question. Ask. Camille smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. It was the smile of a woman who had just realized she was sitting across from the only other person in the room who mattered. Your brother seems very confused about your work, she said. Your parents seem to think you are lost. She paused, letting the anticipation build. But I am curious, she continued. That little hobby of yours, the one you run from your apartment, the supply chain project? She leaned forward. I held her gaze. I did not blink. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Grant. The question hung there, vibrating in the air. The trap was sprung, the exit doors were locked, and I was holding the key. I took a breath. The name. Camille repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Tell them the name. The silence that followed Camille's question was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pressurized. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum that pulled at the eardrums. What is the name of your company? Peyton. I looked at Camille. Her eyes were wide, pleading, and terrified. She was a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into the fog, realizing that the ground she had been standing on the prestige of the Monroe family. The arrogance of her fiancé was nothing but crumbling sandstone. She needed me to build a bridge. She needed me to confirm the impossible logic that had formed in her mind. I did not answer immediately. I let the question hang there. I let it ferment. I wanted my family to fill that silence. I wanted them to have one last chance to show exactly who they were before I destroyed the version of reality they lived in. I picked up my water glass again. I watched the condensation slide down the side, pooling on the white tablecloth. I took a sip. I set it down. The clink of the glass against the coaster was the only sound in the world. Richard could not stand it. The silence made him itch. To a man like my father, silence was a loss of control. It was a vacuum where his authority did not exist. He needed to fill it with noise, with bluster, with anything that reestablished him as the patriarch. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. It sounded like a bark. Oh, for heaven's sake. Camille, Richard said, waving his hand at me as if I were a mild annoyance. Like a gnat. Do not interrogate the poor girl. She probably does not even have a registered name for it yet. He looked at me with a sneer disguised as a smile. She changes the name every other week. Richard continued, pouring himself more wine. Last year it was, what was it? Peyton Data Dreams, or Tech Solutions. It is always something generic. She prints up business cards, feels important for a month, and then moves on to the next hobby. Grant jumped in, eager to join the chorus. He was still rattled by Camille's intensity, and his defense mechanism was to belittle me. Yeah, Grant said, leaning back and crossing his arms. Do not make her say it. Camille, it is probably something embarrassing like Peyton's computer help. You are going to make her blush. Let us just talk about the wedding. We need to decide on the florists. Evelyn chimed in, her voice soft and pitiful. Grant is right. She said, Peyton, honey, you do not have to answer if you do not want to. We know you are trying. You do not have to prove anything to us. Just eat your dinner. They were begging me to be mediocre. They were practically praying for me to be a failure so the world would make sense again. If I was small, they were big. If I was lost, they were the guides. I looked at them. I looked at the 3 people who shared my DNA. I memorized their faces in this moment, the smugness, the condescension, the absolute certainty that they were the sun, and I was just a cold, distant rock. Then I looked at Camille. She had not moved. She had not blinked. She was ignoring them entirely. Her focus locked on me like a laser. I cleared my throat. The sound was soft, but it cut through Richard's laughter like a razor blade. The name of the company, I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion, is Kestrel Grid. I watched the words hit them. For Richard and Grant, the words were meaningless sounds. They were just syllables. They had heard the name Kestrel Grid in the news. They had bragged about it to clients. But their brains refused to connect those 2 majestic words with the daughter sitting in a thrift store blazer. Richard frowned, swirling his wine. Kestrel. What grid see? I told you. Sounds like a pest control company. Or a power tool brand. It lacks elegance. Peyton. You really should hire a branding consultant. Grant snorted. Kestrel Grid. Yeah. Sounds like a knockoff video game. Did you come up with that yourself? But Camille? Camille stopped breathing. She did not blink. She did not breathe. She sat there, frozen, as if I had just reached across the table and slapped her. Kestrel. Grid, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. It was a breathy, fragile sound. I nodded once. Kestrel Grid. Richard laughed again. Louder this time. See nonsense. Now. About the rehearsal dinner. But Camille moved. She moved with a sudden, jerky urgency that made Grant flinch. She grabbed her purse from the floor and ripped it open. Her hands were shaking, visibly shaking. She fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it on the table. Camille Grant asked, annoyed, What are you doing? Put the phone away. Camille ignored him. She unlocked the screen, her fingers flying across the glass. She was not texting. She was searching. She was typing into the global financial database app that all partners at Redwood Crest used a direct line to the pulse of the market. She typed 2 words, Kestrel Grid. I watched the reflection of the screen in her eyes. I saw the moment the results loaded. Her face went pale. All the color drained out of her cheeks, leaving her looking like a marble statue. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Grant, oblivious as ever, leaned over to look at her screen. What are you looking up? Grant asked. You are not actually checking her little website. Are you, babe? Do not waste your data. It is probably just a landing page with a picture of a cat. Camille did not hear him. Her eyes were darting back and forth, reading the text on her screen. I knew exactly what she was seeing. She was looking at the company profile. Kestrel Grid, founded 3 years ago, valuation private, estimated at $400 million, sector logistics, AI, predictive infrastructure. And then, she scrolled down. I saw her finger tremble as she swiped up. She was looking for the leadership team. Grant, still trying to be part of the moment, scoffed. Look at her. She is trying to find it. It probably does not even show up on Google. Camille, you have to type in the full URL. Camille let out a sound. It was a gasp. Sharp and sudden. She looked up from the phone. She looked at Richard. Then she looked at Grant. And finally, she looked at me. Her eyes were shining. They were wet with shock, with fear, and with a sudden, overwhelming realization of the scale of the lie she had been told by my family. She held the phone up. Her hand was shaking so hard the screen was vibrating. She turned the screen toward Grant and Richard. Read this, she said. Her voice was raspy. Richard squinted. I do not have my reading glasses. Camille. What is it? Grant leaned in. It is just a news article. Read the headline. Grant. Camille commanded. Grant sighed. Annoyed. Fine. The Invisible Architect. How Kestrel Grid is Rewiring the Global Supply Chain. He stopped. He blinked. Okay. So Grant said, looking confused. We know Kestrel Grid is a big deal. That is who Dad is trying to partner with. What does this have to do with Peyton's little hobby? Camille did not answer him. She pulled the phone back and looked at the screen again. She read aloud from the article, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. The company is helmed by an enigmatic founder known only as PER. This reclusive CEO has refused all interviews, declined all public appearances, and operates with a level of anonymity that rivals the most secure intelligence agencies. PER is considered one of the most brilliant strategic minds of the decade, having built a digital empire that no one sees, but everyone depends on. She stopped reading. The room was silent, but it was a confused silence. Richard and Grant were still not making the connection. Their prejudice was a firewall that logic could not penetrate. Richard chuckled nervously. Well, yes, PRR, that is the fellow we are trying to meet. Mysterious chap, probably an eccentric genius type. I bet he works out of a bunker in Silicon Valley. Camille lowered the phone slowly. She placed it on the table, face up. She looked at Richard with an expression of profound pity. He is not a fellow. Richard, Camille said softly, and he is not in Silicon Valley. Grant frowned. What are you talking about? Camille turned to me. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and terror. She was looking at the woman she had almost married into a family of fools to get access to. She was looking at the hobbyist she had been prepared to tolerate. She took a deep breath. PR, Camille whispered. I looked back at her. I did not smile. I did not blink. I sat with the posture of a queen on a throne of their own making. Yes, I said. Camille's eyes searched mine. PR. She repeated, testing the letters on her tongue. And then, she asked the question that would decapitate the Monroe family ego once and for all. What does PR stand for? Peyton. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Grant laughed. Oh my God, Camille, are you serious? You think PR stands for what Peyton's roommate, please, it is a coincidence. There are 1 million people with those initials. Grant looked at me, expecting me to join in the joke, expecting me to admit that I had just chosen a similar name to sound cool. Tell her. Peyton, Grant said, rolling his eyes. Tell her it is just a coincidence so we can order dessert. I looked at Grant. I looked at the man who had sent me $600 for a dress. I looked at the man who had tried to trick me into signing away my life's work. I turned back to Camille. I leaned forward slightly, bringing my face into the light of the chandelier. PR, I said clearly, enunciating every syllable. Stands for Peyton Reyes. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. It was not the silence of a pause in conversation. It was the silence of a car crash immediately after the impact. It was the silence of a building collapsing. Richard dropped his fork. It hit the china plate with a sound like a gunshot. Grant's mouth fell open. He looked from me to Camille, waiting for the punchline, waiting for someone to laugh. But nobody laughed. Camille was staring at me, her chest heaving. She knew it was true. The missing pieces, the edge computing, the legal knowledge, the lack of money worries, the rumors of a female founder, it all fit. Peyton, Reyes. Camille whispered. Richard's face went from red to white. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in his life, he saw the blazer. He saw the lack of jewelry. But now, he saw something else. He saw the calmness. He saw the confidence. No, Richard croaked. That is impossible. You are Peyton. You are my daughter. You fix computers. I am the CEO. Richard, I said. Grant stood up. He knocked his chair over. It fell backward onto the carpet with a dull thud. You are lying, Grant screamed. You are lying. You just Googled that. You are trying to steal my thunder. You are not a CEO. You are a loser. I did not flinch. Check the registration. Grant, I said softly. Camille grabbed her phone again. She tapped the screen. She pulled up the corporate filing data, the deep-level data that you have to pay to access. She read it. Registered Agent Peyton Reyes, Principal Executive Office, Charleston, South Carolina. She looked up at Grant. She turned the phone around so he could see it. "It is her, Grant," Camille said. Her voice was hollow. "It is her." Grant stared at the screen. He stared at my name. Evelyn let out a small, high-pitched whimper. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God." Evelyn whispered, "Oh my God." I picked up my napkin. I folded it neatly. I placed it on the table. I looked at them. I looked at the wreckage of their arrogance. They had spent the entire night worshiping a ghost. They had spent years praying to an idol of success, and all that time, they had been spitting in the face of the God they were kneeling to. "I am the one you have been trying to call." "Richard," I said, "I am the one whose emails you have been blocked from." I turned to Grant, "And I am the one who is definitely not in your league." The screen of Camille's phone was a beacon in the dim light of the private dining room, illuminating the wreckage of my family's ego. She turned the device slowly, like a judge presenting evidence to a jury, ensuring that everyone at the table had a clear, unobstructed view of the truth they had spent a lifetime denying. There it was, glowing in high-definition pixels, the corporate filing for Kestrel Grid, the articles of incorporation, the bio page of the CEO, which Camille had accessed through her firm's private diligence portal. CEO Peyton Reyes, ownership stake, 100%. Richard stared at the screen. His face was a mask of gray ash. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn down, only to realize he had been the one holding the matches. He tried to speak, to summon the bluster that had served him for 60 years, but his voice failed him. "No," Richard croaked, the word dying in his throat. "That is impossible. You are just Peyton. You fix laptops. You live in that apartment. You drive that terrible car." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to tell him it was a prank. He wanted me to say I had hacked the website. He wanted me to be a fraud because if I was real, then he was the fool. I looked at him calmly. "I drive that car because I do not need a vehicle to tell me who I am, Richard. And I live in that apartment because it is quiet. It is the one place where nobody asks me to be anything other than what I am." Grant was vibrating. It was a physical tremor that started in his hands and shook his entire frame. It was a toxic cocktail of jealousy, fear, and humiliation. He was looking at the phone, then at me, then at Camille. He realized that the little sister he had sent $600 to for a dress could buy and sell his entire existence before breakfast. "Why?" Grant stammered, his voice rising to a shout. "Why didn't you tell us?" He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "You let us sit here and talk about this. You let me make a fool of myself. If you were this big shot, CEO, why didn't you say anything? We are your family." I picked up my water glass and took a sip. The cool liquid felt good against the heat of their anger. I put the glass down. "I didn't tell you, Grant, because you never asked." I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. "For 10 years, not one of you has asked me a single question about my life that wasn't an accusation. You didn't ask what I was building. You asked why I didn't have a real job. You didn't ask about my code. You asked when I would stop playing games. You didn't look at me and see a person. You saw a problem to be solved. You saw a flaw in the Monroe brand." I leaned forward. "Why would I share my success with people who only wanted to consume it? Why would I give you the satisfaction of taking credit for something you tried to destroy?" Grant opened his mouth to argue, to rewrite history. But Camille stood up. The sound of her chair scraping back was final. It sounded like a gavel. She looked at Grant. Her expression was not angry. It was disappointed. It was the look of a woman realizing she had bought a counterfeit bag and was now going to return it. "You used your sister as bait," Camille said. Her voice was steady, cold, and lethal. Grant looked up at her, panic flooding his eyes. "Babe, no. It was business. We were just trying to—" "You lied to me." Camille cut him off. "You told me you had a meeting with PR. You told me you were close to the deal. You stood there and lied to my face while the actual CEO was sitting right across from you, eating bread. She reached down to her left hand. Grant's eyes went wide. Camille, wait, do not do this. We can fix this. Now that we know Peyton is the CEO. It is even better. Think about it. We have the connection. We are family. Camille pulled the diamond ring off her finger. It was a heavy stone. One Grant had likely financed to the hilt. She placed it on the table next to her unfinished plate. It made a sharp click. I do not do business with liars. Grant, Camille said, and I certainly do not marry them. Grant stared at the ring. The color drained from his face. The engagement, the merger he had banked his future on, was dead. Richard, seeing the ship sinking, decided to throw his son overboard to save himself. He turned to me, his face arranging itself into a grotesque parody of fatherly affection. He smiled, showing too many teeth. Peyton, darling, listen to me. He reached out a hand across the table. I did not take it. Let us not be hasty, Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Grant is an idiot. We all know that. He made a mistake. But look at the bigger picture here. This is incredible news, my daughter. The CEO of Kestrel Grid. He laughed. A nervous, hacking sound. I always knew you had it in you. Deep down, I knew. That is why I pushed you so hard. I wanted you to succeed. And now look at you. We can do great things together. Peyton, Monroe Consulting and Kestrel Grid. Think of the synergy. I can handle your financials. I can manage your estate. We are family after all. Blood is thicker than water. I looked at him. I looked at the man who, 20 minutes ago, had called me dead weight. I looked at the man who had tried to trick me into signing a sweep clause to steal my data. He thought the word family was a magic spell that erased abuse. He thought he could insult me for a decade and then send me an invoice for his love. I reached for my phone. I am glad you brought up business. Richard, I said. I unlocked the screen and pressed the speed dial for Sarah. I put the phone on speaker and set it in the center of the table. It rang once. Yes. Peyton Sarah's voice filled the room. Crisp and professional. Sarah, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my father, I need you to execute a protocol immediately. Go ahead. Sarah replied. I want you to blacklist Monroe Consulting Group from all Kestrel Grid communication channels. Block their domains. Block their IP addresses. If they attempt to contact any of our employees, partners, or subsidiaries, I want it flagged as harassment. Richard's mouth fell open. Peyton, wait, I wasn't finished. And Sarah, I continued. Regarding the legal document Grant Monroe attempted to have me sign tonight, the one with the hidden IP assignment clause. Yes, please scan the copy I sent you and forward it to the compliance departments of Redwood Crest, Ironclad Systems, and every other major firm in our sector. Flag it as an attempted corporate data breach via fraudulent misrepresentation. I want a warning note attached to their vendor profile in the industry database. Understood. Sarah said, I am sending the alerts now. Anything else? No? That is all. I hung up. The silence in the room was total. I had not just rejected them, I had nuked them. By reporting them to the compliance boards, I had effectively put a radioactive warning label on their firm. No reputable company would touch them. I had just destroyed Richard's reputation and Grant's career in under 60 seconds. Evelyn let out a sob. It was a loud, wailing sound. She clutched her napkin to her chest, tears streaming down her face. How could you? Evelyn cried. How could you be so cruel? He is your father. He is your brother. You are ruining us. She looked at me with hatred, real, unmasked hatred. We raised you, we fed you, and this is how you repay us, by destroying the family name. You are a monster. Peyton, you are cold and heartless. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I looked down at my mother, who was weeping for the loss of their status, not for the loss of her daughter. I am not being cruel. Mother, I said, I am being professional. I picked up my purse. You spent my entire life telling me that image is everything. You taught me that you have to protect your assets. You taught me that you do not let liabilities drag you down. I gestured to the three of them. You are a liability. You tried to steal from me. You tried to use me. You tried to sell me. I am just doing exactly what you taught me to do. I am protecting the brand. And tonight, the brand is me. I pulled out my wallet. I did not take out cash. I did not take out a credit card. I pulled out a single, heavy cardstock business card. It was matte black with gold embossing. It had my direct line and the Kestrel grid logo. I walked over to Camille. She was standing by the door, watching me with a look of awe. She looked like she was witnessing a natural disaster that she was lucky enough to survive. I handed the card to her. "Call me Monday," I said. "We can discuss the Series C round. I think Redwood Crest would be a good fit, provided the diligence clears." Camille took the card. She looked at it, then at me. She nodded. "Thank you." "Peyton," she whispered. I turned back to the table one last time. Richard was staring at his empty wine glass. Grant was staring at the engagement ring that was no longer on a finger. Evelyn was weeping into her hands. They looked small. They looked like strangers. "You do not have to worry about me coming to the Christmas party," I said. "And do not bother coming to my apartment. I bought a new house this morning. It is in the Hamptons." I paused. "You said tonight that I was lost. You said I was finding myself. Well, you were right. I found myself. And the person I found has no room for people who only love her when she is useful." "You did not lose me tonight," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You lost me years ago. You lost me every time you laughed at me. You lost me every time you apologized for me. You lost me every time you made me feel small so you could feel big." I turned around. "Enjoy the soufflés. I hear they are expensive." I walked out of the private room. I walked down the long corridor lined with French posters. I walked past the maitre d' who bowed to me. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the Charleston night. The air was humid and thick, but to me, it felt like the cleanest air I had ever breathed. I walked to my beat-up sedan. I got in. I threw my purse on the passenger seat. I started the engine. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. The wire transfer for the new house had cleared. I smiled. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the Monroe family behind in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until they were nothing but a speck of light in the darkness. They were the past. I was the future, and the future was looking expensive. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment down below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this revenge story, please subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.